Okay, I'm very excited to be talking to the Chief Investment Officer at Jackson Grant Investment Advisors in Stamford, Connecticut, Julie Jason, and she's also the author of the book, The AARP Retirement Survival Guide, How to Make Smart Financial Decisions in Good and Bad Times. You know, Julie, the title of your book talks about good and bad times. The problem is, how do you know whether you are in fact in good or bad times? Because some people look at the stock market hitting new highs and think it's great, and other people say, no, everything's terrible. How can you identify that?
I love that question, and you know what? It doesn't matter because what you have to do as an investor is ignore everything that doesn't affect your objectives and your risks. So if you're going to be starting out the day trying to figure out, are we in good times or are we in bad times, that'll affect your investment decisions, and it should not. The investment decisions need to be driven by two things: your risk level, how much risk you can afford, and then what you're trying to accomplish. And I want to talk to you about risk a minute. So risk is not something that people have an easy time assessing. And if you remember the risk questionnaires that most people fill out, they really don't ask you the question you need to ask yourself, and that is, how much money can you afford to lose?
Right. I think that's a critical question. One of the things that, I've discovered over the years is a lot of people don't even think in terms of percent because they don't understand it. You could say to someone, if you had $1 million and you lost 10%, how much money would you have left? And for whatever reason, we can blame high school math or elementary school math. They don't know the answer. So,
yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, what you said is exactly true. I'll often tell a client, I'll say, listen, let's say you put $1 million into the market, and next month your statement said $900,000. What would you do then?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Great way to put it. And of course, if you're talking about retirement and retirement security and risk and whether markets are good and whether markets are bad, then you have to put yourself in the position of the client. Is he retired already and living off of income, or is he approaching retirement? And everybody is approaching retirement, even if they're 20 years old. Mm-hmm. And it helps to think that way, by the way. So if it's somebody who's already retired and living off of portfolio, risk has a very important context and must be understood.
Well, also when you say risk, I think you have to quantify that as well, or qualify that really, because let's talk about the guy who is retired and he says, I finally made it, and now I'm going to live off the interest from my investments. So he takes his $400,000 and he goes to the bank and he says, okay, I'm going to put it in CDs and live on the interest. And then he finds that he can hardly buy, the Starbucks on the way home. So he's got the risk that simply he's not going to make enough money to pay the bills.
Exactly. And inflation and taxes, of course, taxes won't be great on that income. But
thank God. At least you can be happy about something. Good positive spin.
Yeah. But taxes are so important to understand, and of course inflation. So it's interesting that you would think that it would be pretty straightforward to sit down and think about how much am I spending today, how much will I need to spend in the future considering inflation and taxes. But you would think it's pretty straightforward, but it really isn't. And so, before we take on a client, what we like to do is to do a cash flow analysis that pinpoints today and then looks to the future. But of course, everything that we assume today changes. So we redo these cash flow analyses every year, once a year, to bring them up to date. But our goal is always to make sure that the market, even if there is a decline in the market, doesn't affect that cash flow. In other words, just as you said, if somebody wants to live off their dividends and interest, that is the ideal situation. Because if you think about it, you have total return. Market data is typically total return data, so you have the dividend payment if it's a stock plus the change in price action on the individual stock. But ideally, if someone can set up a portfolio so that it's just the income flow that supports them, then market volatility is less of a concern. You're paying your bills with income generation. And that, of course, is the ideal portfolio structure. But in order to do that, there has to be enough capital, and of course, the capital has to grow to offset inflation.
Right, or there just has to be enough capital so you don't have to worry about that. That's the ideal. We're talking with Julie Jason, who is the author of the AARP Retirement Survival Guide. We've been talking about good and bad times in the market. Julie, let's dive in a little bit more to something you're talking about, which is the possibility of living off your investments. One of the arguments that many people will make who are real stock market fans, and there's lots of retrospective evidence to prove this, they'll say if you just put all of your money into the stock market, all of it, which is pretty radical, and you take off X percent every year, X number of dollars every year. Had you been doing this over whatever period you look at, you would have been fine, and you would have stayed ahead of inflation, and in fact, you would have probably built wealth. But as an advisor, I know that I would never say something like that, and I'm guessing you wouldn't either. But is there some logic to that?
Well, now, also a very complex but very important question, and the answer is no. There is no logic to that, and the reason is very simple. You have periods in the market that are, let's take the internet bubble. The internet bubble burst, and we suffered 3 years of stock market decline. So if you are following, Warren Buffett has said in the event he predeceased his wife that he would recommend that she put everything into an S&P index fund. Of course, he or she could do that because they would not suffer if the market went down, which it does from time to time, of course. They wouldn't require that money to pay bills. So anyone who has the need to pay bills in retirement cannot follow that strategy.
Well, everyone's got to pay bills in retirement.
Well, meaning, I'm sorry, so I didn't state that right. From their portfolios.
Right.
From
okay.
their portfolios. Right. So, no, it is not a good strategy. And the studies done of what is a safe withdrawal rate, and the number typically comes up as 4%. But the problem with that is that it has to be correctly invested in order for any number to work for any length of time.
I've never understood that study also. Maybe you can explain it to me a little bit better, because to me it seems that every client is incredibly different. Some
Exactly.
people have pensions, and some people have a rich mother-in-law who's giving them gifts, and some people are getting an inheritance. It just seems, when someone actually decides that he's going to bet his future on the 4% rule, it just doesn't make sense to me.
It makes no sense to me either.
Right.
And it is not a number that anyone can rely on. It really depends on age, horizon, where the money is coming from, how much money has to come from the portfolio versus how much money is coming from Social Security and pension, and et cetera. And it depends on how the person invests. So there are a lot of people who invest on their own, the do-it-yourself investors, who need to run through numbers, run through different scenarios, and they cannot rely on a 4% or 3% or any percent number unless they do that, because the key is, how are you investing?
Right. Let's touch on something you also mentioned before, which was if you have income. One of the arguments that certainly insurance salesmen would make is they would say, listen, take enough of your money, plug it into an annuity so that you will get guaranteed lifetime income, and then the rest do whatever you want with. But they say make sure your income is coming from something that is very regular, like an annuity. What's your feeling on that one?
Well, again, that's a complex area for the following reasons. Number one, you have to look at how much does the annuity cost and what is the benefit that it pays out, who the insurer is, and what happens to your spouse if you should predecease. Does the annuity go to zero, or is there a survivor benefit, and the like? So it's really not as simple as it appears. The cost of annuities, life annuities, a classic plain vanilla annuity that is a pension substitute, can be very costly. And if you think about demographics and you think about interest rates, the older you are and the higher that interest rates are, the better the payout will be. So now, in our interest rate environment, you'd really have to look very closely to see whether it makes any sense. So again, it turns on that person's individual situation. And I'll tell you one place that I think an annuity is a valuable addition, and that is if you have a spendthrift situation, and weak in terms of market knowledge, a person who's just not comfortable making investment decisions. Take those two factors, and if there is no existing pension, what I'd like to see in that situation is someone who, if the annuity makes sense, in other words, financially, if you can get one at the right price, considering your age and the current interest rate environment, I'd like to see a payment like that come in to cover the essential expenses in the household. So just to give a really clear, a very simple example, so if, the utilities and food expenses, the expenses of living are, say, $1,000 a month, and if Social Security is $500 a month, and I'm just making up numbers so it's easy, you'd want another $500 to come in from something like an annuity, because then you don't have to worry about running out of money, because you can always cut back on discretionary expenses. Of course, you don't have an inflation riders typically on the annuities, and you would need one, But if it's a pension substitute, most pensions don't have inflation riders on them either. So, you have to have other assets that you're growing at the same time. But it gives someone a lot more of a secure future, knowing that they will not run out of money if they can cover their essential expenses.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great example. I think the idea of realizing that different investments are right for different people and saying, oh, everyone should have an annuity is a mistake, but saying someone who may be suffering from this problem of being a spendthrift or having some other issue which would make preserving his capital put that in jeopardy. So that would be a place to consider. I like how you're presenting
about that in the AARP Retirement Survival Guide, which, by the way, that book is intended to be an all-market manual, and which it is. That's why I like your question. Hence the title. And it does go through how to do cash flow analyses and how to actually figure out whether someone has enough money to live on for the rest of their lives and what they can do if they haven't saved enough. So it's intended to give the reader an idea of whether there's room for improvement and then define the room and then what to do about it. Actually, we should probably change the title to Room for Improvement.
Okay, well, that's a great introduction to my final question, which is, if people want to learn more about what you're doing in your book and follow you a little bit more, where can they go?
Go to my website, which is juliejason.com. So it's juliejason.com.
Okay, we'll put a link to that at the show notes of today's show at goldsteinongelt.com. Julie Jason, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you. This is fun.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Check out all of Doug's money ideas at goldsteinongelt.com. Doug specializes in helping people who live outside the United States handle their U.S. investment accounts. If you have a question that you would like answered on the air or off, contact Doug at his website or send him an email to doug@profile-financial.com.